literally and non-literally turned into the territories of colonies for terrorists and their families. They are trying to radicalize the remaining people in Rugban and Al-Hol, which results in a real threat of their involvement in the terrorist activities and the involvement in the so-called sleeper cells of ISIL in Syria and Iraq. In spite of the economic difficulties, Syrian authorities continue their economic programs to restore the economy, to repatriate the Syrians. In the previous years, following Russia's initiatives on the return of refugees and IDPs, 330,000 people returned to Syria. Peaceful life is coming back to the country. The trade and economy links are getting more intense. The country is going out of its isolation. Over 30 countries confirmed their participation in the 61st annual Damascus International Fair at the end of August and the beginning of September. It plays an important role in the promotion of national economy and attraction of investment. At the end of July, a Syrian delegation visited Minsk to discuss with the Belarus authorities the participation of local companies in the post-conflict restoration of the country. The Syrian-Arab relations are getting better. Recently we learned about the intention of the President of Palestine, Mahmoud Abbas, to visit Damascus in the near future. According to the data of the Syrian Education Ministry, Russia has become one of the leaders in the provision of scholarships for Syrian students. It allocates 1/3 of all the foreign grants for the studies. We are glad to see we make a contribution into the future of the Syrian people. Speaking of Sudan, we continue monitoring the situation in this friendly state. From the very beginning of the crisis, Russia has been calling on the involved sides of the conflict to settle the existing differences using solely political, peaceful means based on broad dialogue involving all the responsible political forces of the country. We confirm the political agreement between the military council and the opposition alliance signed with the mediation of the African Union and Ethiopia on the establishment of temporary government bodies. We hope that this agreement will stabilize the situation in Sudan. At the same time, we believe it necessary to finish the talks on the constitutional declaration which would define the authorities of the temporary governmental bodies. We believe that the settlement of the crisis is the internal affair of Sudan. Any external interference is unacceptable. We receive a large number of questions concerning, once again, the increased flood of news concerning the situation in the Persian Gulf. Due to the US escalation in the region, we are concerned about the escalation of the conflict potential in the Persian Gulf. The current events are approaching a dangerous line, which could lead to a large-scale military conflict. The United States of America is trying to escalate the situation by organizing, in fact, a pirate capture of the tanker in the strait in order to expand the US military presence in the region under the pretext of defending the freedom of navigation. At the same time, they try to involve other countries in their provocative schemes, even the countries located far away from the region. They are trying to establish a so-called maritime coalition. This is a favorable trick of the recent years, to establish coalitions based not on the international law, but rather the establishment of so-called coalitions whose authorities are not defined by any laws and do not have any legitimate platforms. They only act based on the sole interests of a certain group of states. So this so-called maritime coalition is meant not to maintain peace, but rather to maintain forcible pressure on Iran. The first fiddle, once again, is played by the US. Let me remind you that before the unilateral withdrawal of the US from the JCPOA on the Iran nuclear program, Both the maritime navigation and the oil traffic through the Hormuz Strait was stable. But something went wrong along the way. Let me remind you that there is no necessity of establishing any coalitions for maintaining security until the US started to artificially escalate the tensions. It seems that Washington is only trying to find a pretext to escalate the situation and to continue the aggressive rhetoric against Iran and to transform the situation into a more active conflict phase, guided by the US political interests and calculations. In the upcoming phase of the election campaign in the US, we believe that this is a negative practice, trying to find the support from the voters, or rather trying to manipulate the mind and the information and therefore influence the political ratings. The authorities are risking the lives of civilians in other countries and in their own country as well, both civilians and the military personnel. By the way, the US allies in these so-called coalitions should better think about the situation. They must realize that they are getting involved as pawns in someone else's game. The current crisis improves the relevancy of finding new ways of long-term stabilization of the region. For many years we've been proposing a solution in the context of this region. We have developed the concept of collective security in the area of the Persian Gulf. An updated version of the concept was presented on the 23rd of July by the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister, Mr. Mikhail Bogdanov. This initiative is based on the maintenance of international law, multilateralism and equal participation of all the states of the region. We hope it can find support. And in the context of the current events in the region, we received numerous questions on the situation around the tanker that had Russian sailors in its crew. We are speaking about the Stena Impera tanker. The Russian embassy in Iran is monitoring the situation around Russian citizens in the British tanker's crew, which is currently anchored in the Bandar Abbas port in Iran. On the 26th of July, the diplomats of the Russian embassy in Iran had a meeting with the sailors. Their health condition is fine. They have all the necessary medication and food. The Iranian authorities have received an address asking to settle the situation around the Russian citizens, to make sure they can come back home. This is a priority for us. We will continue solving the situation concerning Russian citizens. Let me underline that this is one of our priorities. Now the situation in Venezuela. We fully support the various efforts to find mutually acceptable ways of settling the situation in the country. Russia is interested in finding a solution to the Venezuelan problem, and we call to refrain on any comments on the goals of the talks in a Norwegian format led between the legitimate Venezuelan authorities and the opposition, as well as refrain from any attempts to influence these talks. Outside pressure on the process does not accelerate it. On the contrary, it sows discontent and mistrust and slows down the negotiation process. Such policy of the US and its allies might undermine direct contacts and result in a new escalation of the crisis, which in turn makes it even harder to solve the conflict in a peaceful way without the use of force. All the members of the global community are responsible for the success of the Venezuelan dialogue or for its undermining. Unfortunately, even the first steps in the negotiation process provoked concerns about the so-called Group of Friends of Venezuelan Democracy. On the 16th of July, the EU representative for foreign policy threatened sanctions if any tangible results are not reached at the negotiations. This is an interesting diplomatic move, saying that If the negotiations are not successful, sanctions would be implemented. These are the new turns in the diplomacy of the European Union. The US Secretary of State on the 19th of July declared that the sole purpose of the talks is only the resignation of Maduro. End of quote. They are saying that they are not talking to find ways of the conflict settlement. They are saying that they need to achieve the goals and tasks stated by a third party, which is most surprising. All of these ultimatums can only be explained by Washington's feeling that a real compromise can be achieved between the participants of the talks, which would play against the interests of the US administration. Apart from the verbal threats and the mentions of the military option, more tangible signals are also sent to Venezuela. The US reconnaissance aircraft continue their flights at the borders of Venezuela. On the 24th of July, the US Finance Ministry included 10 more citizens of Venezuela and Colombia and numerous countries from China, Colombia, Emirates, Panama and Turkey into their sanction list. This is another example of actual pressure and blackmail. By the way, do you know why these companies were included on the relevant lists? They were included on the list for purchasing food within the social aid program to the poor in violation of the sanctions. This is how they show their concern for the Venezuelan people. Let me remind you that the well-being of Venezuelan people is the basis for the US involvement in the whole story. Moreover, the Americans continue using double standards, trying to strangle Venezuela in an economic way. In a new step, they introduced sanctions against 5 Venezuelan oil companies. In such a way, pursuing the policy of unfair competition, the Americans are trying to push other players away from the Venezuelan oil market. They only think about the interests of their own large oil business. This is absolute hypocrisy and double standards, and a violation of all the accepted rules and norms of international relations which were proposed by the democratic community as the rules for the global play and the game. And most importantly, they are making new concessions for the companies who do not suffer from the excessive finances. They are using them to enrich themselves. But when we're talking about the poor, about the children who urgently require the help since they suffer from cancer and they do not make any concessions for them. You know that we continue monitoring the topic of the falsification and distortion of history, in particular history of World War II. That is why we cannot ignore the blatant facts, numerous facts. We are talking about the publishing in another European Union country of the work, if I may say so, or the anti-work, if I could say so, the Mein Kampf. Let me remind you, for those who are not aware, this is a work of Adolf Hitler. We took note of the information that the Mein Kampf book, banned in Russia by Adolf Hitler, would be reprinted in Estonia in August this year. The first printed edition by Matrix Publishing was fully sold in Estonia. The Matrix Publishing was notorious for the publishings of scandalous authors. In particular, it was publishing books by Estonian Nazi supporters and their current modern followers. In the recent years, we see new scandal around this book around in Europe and in Estonia, and in 2016 a book was published in Germany with new comments by the German Institute, and 85,000 copies were sold instead of the original 4,000. At the same year, an Italian El Giornale newspaper published the first volume of the book as a free addendum to the newspaper.
In 2018, it was available in the Netherlands after several years ban of selling this book in the country, and in 2020, the French translation will be published. One of Warsaw theaters made a performance despite it was prohibited in Poland, and it was made based on this book. I think that everyone forgot what this book looks like. Mein Kampf is a military-oriented, man-hateful book which outlined the ideas of Hitler's future crimes and Nazis' crimes, and the terror was announced as a legal method of political fight. It was stipulated in this way in the book. In Russia, it is one of the extremist books, and it is banned to publish and the reprint of this very text, although with the critical comments by historians, risks to be an ideological bomb amid frequent attempts to revise the results of the Second World War and rehabilitate the fascist collaborators and spread neo-Nazism, racism and xenophobia in Europe. In Estonia, the situation becomes even worse since the book is published without finding aid or censorship. Apart from Matrix publishing book, the Estonian bookshelves were hit by a comic strip, and it's called Hipster Hitler. The comic strip makes fun over such awful and dire topics as Holocaust and aggression against the Soviet Union, and there are media in Estonia that take active efforts to rehabilitate Hitler supporters, including Culture and Life magazine, which explicitly popularizes Estonian SS units and the period of the German occupation between 1941 and 1944. The spread of such literature is not the only sign of the critical level of neo-Nazi sentiment in Estonia. On the 27th of July, those who admire such activities in cinema met as they usually do, and there was a fun fair that sold the products with Nazi symbols. And amid that, war criminals are rehabilitated, and the memorials to the victims of Holocaust and Soviet liberator servicemen are desecrated. And we still hope that there are many structures and bodies in Europe, including the OSCE, EU, and the UN will finally pay close attention to this dangerous situation and influence Tallinn, and we hope that the Estonian civil society will counter the situation when their country is turning into a stronghold of neo-fascism in Europe. And to those who are engaged in promoting the cannibal ideology condemned by the Nuremberg Tribunal, just to score political points, should be ashamed, since there are many descendants of Estonians who defended and liberated the homeland from the fascist invaders. We have also noted today's publication, and I'm referring to the British newspapers that contained references to the military of the UK about creating special cyber units that conduct offensives in the cyberspace. I'm referring to the Daily Telegraph, and it says about the need to repel, including threats from Russia. And the Times, for example, says directly that these units will conduct cyber attacks and spread disinformation. The end of quote. So it's not just anti-Russian hysteria that hit the record high, and its de facto recognition of aggressive UK's intentions in the cybersphere. It's surprising that only a month has passed since the UK organized the global conference on the freedom of media, and the British authorities now revealed their true intentions, and they are to manipulate information for the military and political purposes, including in the cybersphere. We will still keep track of the topic and return to it in detail. It's just our first response. And now I would like to say a few words about a topic which is of great interest to us. Indeed, it's the international approaches to the problems of artificial intelligence. So between the 11th and 12th of July, the UNESCO headquarters hosted the World Conference on the Artificial Intelligence, organized by Information for All program and the French University Paris Sud, and Russia was a partner of the conference. A big range of international institutions was involved in the conference, including WIPO, ILO, the EU, the World Bank, ITU, OECD, and experts. They were predominantly Western speakers, and other regions were presented only by Brazil, Taiwan, and Japan. The event practically went beyond the frameworks of narrow and quite specialized topics, which are the impact digitalization has on the labor market, and the participants' reports addressed many aspects, including educational, ethical, economic, and many others. By and large, the conference confirmed UNESCO's intention to take the lead in formulating the regulatory basis in the sphere. In general, the event looked like an exchange of views on quite a topical, new, dynamically developing topic. No follow-up documents were adopted, and at the plenary meeting of the conference, the director of the Computational Science and Engineering Center of the Skolkovo Institute of Science and Technology, who participates in formulating the national strategy of Russia on artificial intelligence, delivered a report on our country's approaches to these problems. And he made an emphasis on the need to pay special attention to humans' role in the aspects of artificial intelligence, and the need to formulate international ethical frameworks, and the need to coordinate interstate approaches to elaborate common policy in the sphere of artificial intelligence. So, and I would like to comment on what work is being done on international platforms right now. And now, you know, you've probably noticed that we commented on the statement made by ministers of foreign affairs of different countries in relation to Russia's internal situation. Over the past week, there were quite many. It is surprising how sensitive our foreign colleagues are in relation to the internal affairs of Russia. They expressed their concerns with the electoral process in Russia, and we commented on the events that take place in Russia through our embassies abroad, and we'll do the same in the future. We'll make explanations, and we try to make them as easy and comfortable as possible with videos and photographs, and we call on them to pay more attention to their own internal policy. And we know that there are principles of non-interference into the internal affairs of other countries, which our Western colleagues forget about, and we try to remind that the international law requires to refrain from any comments or actions that can be interpreted as interference, and seizing the opportunity. And I would like to say that a number of ministers of foreign affairs stepped in, and I would like to explain certain legal aspects of electoral processes to our foreign colleagues. I would like to say that before making clumsy statements that are far from reality, you should remember, since we're talking about international relations, so you should remind of the international documents that were adopted by these countries and that these countries participated in formulating. According to Article 19 of the International Pact of Civil and Political Rights, says that the freedom of expression and speech stipulates certain obligations and liabilities, and it can be accompanied by certain limitations which should be fixed in the law and be necessary for the protection of state security and civil order, health, or the moral state of the population. It's not the Russian legislation that I have quoted, but the International Pact on Political and Civil Rights. Article 21 of this very pact about the peaceful assemblies stipulates that certain limitations can take place in the interest of a state or civil order, the protection of health and moral state, or the protection of rights and freedoms of certain individuals. The same provisions are fixed in Article 10, Article 11, and the European Convention on the Rights of Individuals. And there can be another provisions that say about the prevention of unrest. So for our partners from the West, I would like to say that the procedure of the realization of the right for peaceful assemblies is stipulated in the federal law on assemblies and rallies of the 19th of July 2014, and the provisions fully comply with the agreements and conventions that I have just mentioned. It is strange to hear the rebukes from such countries as the US, the UK, France and Germany, where the authorities feverishly lambast the media and certain individuals. And we can hardly say about the proportionality of the actions when we see how the rallies are dispersed in London, in Ferguson, in Frankfurt and many other cities. So these are the countries that teach us what to do. I would like to say a few words about our plans for August. There are going to be several field events, and we're going to invite you to participate in them. One of our tasks is to invite you to certain interesting fora that take place in Russia and to draw your attention to marvelous and wonderful places where they are held. So our next briefing will take place on the 9th of August, on Friday, in one of Russia's regions, which is a usual thing. And we haven't held briefings in Moscow region. And now we will do that. We will meet in Solnechnogorsk, near a picturesque lake of Sinish. All Russia Youth Educational Forum Teresiansa will take place there between the 5th of July and the 20th of August. And the briefing will take place there. It's a unique creative workshop and communication platform that gives young people from Russia an opportunity to turn life for the better and participate in the changes. So it gives them an opportunity to unleash their creative potential and find an application in different spheres of our life, as well as to present their own developments and projects. I would like to remind you that Teresiansa is an educational forum, and participants can have a direct dialogue with the leading politicians and business leaders, cultural figures and academics. They can get a fair view of the current state of affairs in our country and objective assessments. They can ask questions and receive answers. So I invite everyone to our briefing in Solnechnogorsk. I hope you will like it. So see you soon there, but that's not the end, and I'm ready to answer your questions if there are any. Yes, please. Anna Usanova, Information Agency, Moscow, Baku. There are tensions in Nagorno-Karabakh area. Ceasefire regime is frequently violated. You know that there have been the injured and the deceased on both sides. Yesterday, the Azerbaijani border serviceman was injured. Is Russia and other OSCE countries going to take any steps? Yes, we are really concerned with the tensions on the border, and we express our condolences with the family and the next of kin of the deceased. And the increase in tensions is going counter the recently agreed ceasefire regime and the arrangements on arranging the situation using diplomatic means, and we call on the stakeholders to refrain from the use of force, to show restraint and take measures to stabilize the situation. And as far as the co-chairs are concerned, it's better to address them directly. If we have any additional information, we will say it. It will be a year since the Caspian countries signed the convention about the status of the Caspian Sea. How can you assess their cooperation in this field since the convention was signed? So the document that you've mentioned changed the situation in this important geopolitical and geoeconomic region and made it legally clear-cut. And it boosted the interaction of the Caspian countries in different areas, fields and formats. On the 12th of August, Turkmenistan will host the first Caspian Economic Forum. It's a large-scale event designed to provide a big fillip to trade, economic and investment cooperation in the Caspian area. It will be preceded by the meeting of the ministers of economy and ministers of transport of the Caspian Five, and we see active work of the body that is the high-level working group of the issues of the Caspian Sea, and five-party talks on the methods of establishing direct baselines in Caspian, texts of agreement on cooperation in the sphere of research and rescue missions, sea transport, scientific research, navigation security, fight against poaching and drug trafficking are being elaborated, and Russia welcomes the dynamic and multifaceted cooperation of the countries, and I'm certain that new issues will be further added to the Caspian Sea agenda. This is another proof that the international diplomacy works very well. It's not under the pressure of some informal leaders who claim themselves as such. but by joint efforts and through consultations and talks, which were very difficult and long, I can say it firsthand, we managed to come up to the legal basis of our further cooperation. The countries are very different and they have their goals and tasks, and they have some similar approaches when it comes to international problems and differences as well. But it is an example of a good, mutually beneficial approach aimed at making consensus solutions on the basis of which we can develop cooperation in the legal area as well. Yes, please.
In a Sarhosh agency, yesterday, the United States introduced sanctions against the head of the Iranian Foreign Ministry, Javad Zarif. How could you comment on it? I believe this is the only tool of the US diplomacy to introduce sanctions. You see, in the large picture, speaking in non-diplomatic terms, but rather trying to characterize the situation as it is, the United States of America is going into a deadlock, into an impasse. They deny the opportunity to use the wide range of diplomatic resources and tools required to solve various issues and problems. They only use a single tool in the form of sanctions, and this tool does not work. This tool does not show its efficiency. It has fully discredited itself, as well as those who use it. We see a large and important state using sanctions in a unilateral way as an element of problem solving. This only means that they confirm the inconsistency of all the other methods and institutes. Why do the US diplomats and administration use this way? That's a big question. Perhaps US journalists should relay to the US side. Yes, next please. Mr. Kafkaz Information Agency. During the phone talk, Donald Trump offered Vladimir Putin help in extinguishing the forest fires. Can this fact be considered as a step to restoring dialogue? Yes, it can. Next, please. TASS Information Agency. How could you comment on the approval by the US Senate of a draft law on introducing sanctions against the companies involved into the Nord Stream 2 gas pipe project? Thank you. You know, we are coming back to the US lawmakers. It seems they are constantly trying to find new ways of harming us. So far, they are only discussing this new draft law in the spirit of another anti-Russian campaign. We do not know what these discussions will lead to. We need to understand why exactly this is being done. Perhaps today we should talk in more detail about the mechanics of the issue. This is a draft law on the energy security of Europe. It was introduced in May this year. Do not be surprised that the Americans are talking about the protection of Europeans. They ask for money for their protection later, as we see in the NATO. So, the Committee on Foreign Affairs of the US Senate gave its approval, but in autumn, during the next session, it should be approved in the other committees and then by the Senate in general. The same procedure will be in the Congress. The time frames are not limited. I think there is no point in reacting to every step of the discussion, because this is not the only discussion. There are numerous laws and draft laws like this Speaking of the Congress, as of today it has about 20 similar masterpieces, so to speak, and a large number of the American lawmakers do nothing but introduce new laws of this kind as a way of self-promotion on the topic of the anti-Russian campaign. This is a good opportunity for them to introduce new laws and acts to make themselves memorable for the voters. Another aspect which should not be ignored is that even the most active proponents of sanctions recently started admitting that these measures do not bring the desirable results. They are not doing this for the sake of doing this. They have certain goals and tasks, and the initiators of the sanction pressure themselves admit that sanctions do not work. In the previous years, the US introduced sanctions against Russia on 71 occasions, including 31 occasions starting from 2017 under the current administration. And neither administration managed to achieve anything. Russia has always had its independent policy on the international arena. You know, in one of the countries that Sergei Lavrov recently visited, we were talking with the local political establishment, and the minister told me a wonderful story. It was said that I love watching the statements of the Russian Foreign Ministry. Why? Because in a couple of months or in a year, everything comes true. So our independent policy and our objective evaluations of the current events, as well as our independent analysis of the results of certain international events and our explanations for our own actions, will continue being made. And we do this in an efficient manner because our statements are not based on some virtual reality, followed by excuses and apologies for unlawful actions. Our evaluations are based on the real facts and the situation on the ground, and these actions are supported from the point of view of international law. And the US can not do anything about it. The same goes for the construction of Nord Stream 2. Yes, it is constructed in spite of all the threats, and the initiators of the sanctions are turning themselves into a laughingstock when they publicly admit their unwillingness to give others an opportunity to get involved into a profitable project. They simply show their own lack of strength and influence. Answering the previous sanctions, when we talk about unilateral endless sanctions, more than 71 occasions of sanctions since 2011, this only shows that they lack any strength and they cannot use any other methods. So Washington's attempts to make the companies refuse oil contracts with Russia need certain explanations for the voters. They deprive the companies of a large share of their revenue. They sacrifice the commercial interests of their companies for the sake of the political ambitions. As a result, neither in business nor in politics did the US gain anything from it. Now they are risking to push away their European allies who are interested in the construction of Nord Stream 2, since they understand the scale and the openness and the transparency of the project, as well as the mutually beneficial basis of the project, as well as its legal framework. I believe that very soon the Americans and the American business will ask their politicians to take the responsibility for this policy. So it is my view that they can only use the propaganda effect of such laws they are trying to develop and introduce. This is only aimed to escalate the situation and to create the feeling of anxiety among those who follow the topic. I do not believe that we should make comments and react to all the occasions of similar discussions. Now the next one, please. Hello, Ms. Zakharova. 70 days ago, the European parliamentary elections took place. Nevertheless, a large number of people who were elected to the parliament still do not have an opportunity to assume their posts, even though about 2.5 million citizens of Catalonia voted for them. I am speaking about three people who are the former Catalonian president, Mr. Puigdemont, as well as the political activist Van Comyn, as well as the Junqueras, who is currently in prison, and some local journalists call him a political prisoner. How could you comment on this topic? I do not believe this topic requires our comments. Speaking in general and giving an evaluation of the current topic, I may say that, according to my data, the European Parliament authorities and the government of Spain are currently working on this issue, and we hope that it can be settled within the legal framework. But I do not believe that at this stage this requires our comment. Yes, next, please. New Time Yerevan newspaper. Recently, we learned that the US is planning to significantly reduce the annual financial aid to Armenia. But this is not our fault. Sure, the Commissioner of the Armenian government for the cooperation with the diaspora gave the following comment. She said, this is a way for Washington to punish Armenia for the fact that even after the establishment of the new government, Yerevan continued its traditional policy to enhance cooperation with Moscow and, moreover, sent its contingent to Syria. As you know, Armenian military doctors and minesweepers and other specialists are working in Syria. So, can we interpret the situation in such a way that the presence of good, friendly and partnerly relations with any country can result in a punishment from another country? Speaking frankly, I do not wish to comment on this case in particular. I cannot give a political evaluation since I did not see the quote that you mentioned. I will take a look. I would like to use this as an example of what we mentioned. On the one hand, the Western world, or what we call the Western civilization, for many decades has been teaching lessons to all the other countries of the continent about the necessity to conduct their own independent policy, both internally and externally. Secondly, especially recently, they've been stating the inadmissibility of interference into the internal affairs of other states. That is why the establishment and the improvement of relations between two sovereign states are their own internal affair. Even though we're speaking about foreign policy, this policy is formed based on the political concept, the doctrine, the internal sentiments, and the priorities of the state on the global arena. Therefore, it is not possible for anyone to dictate who to be friends with, what blocks to enter. This goes against the concepts that I mentioned, the concepts that are supported by the Western countries, first of all, the United States of America. We have seen numerous examples of such approaches. When we were talking about the withdrawal or the cancellation of the aid packages that had already been allocated or promised or supposed to be sent, or the introduction of certain sanction pressure against certain countries, we have such examples at hand. Or we can talk about direct threats to the business community, to the companies that conduct commercial activities with the countries which are not to be friends with, according to Washington, or rather, these threats can turn into practical steps and actions of repressive nature. We all remember the story of the European banks, which were punished for their fully legal transactions, which were not favored by the US. This goes against the very values that the United States declared and have always supported in today's international climate, in the international relations. That is why I believe that these contradictions will lead them into an impasse which they would not escape. Their steps cannot be so illogical and contradictory. This always results in a collapse. This is not only a matter of the specific situation. We are talking about a global, or rather philosophical, approach based on the doctrine of the United States concerning its basic values and principles, both for themselves and for the entire world. Next one, please. Baltnews Information Agency. Last week, the Latvian authorities took the decision to block Baltnews website. The Russian Foreign Ministry saw this as an aspiration of the Latvian authorities to clear the information space from independent media. This is not the first case of the Latvian authorities blocking the work of Russian journalists. Therefore, I have a question. How is the Russian Foreign Ministry planning to defend and protect its media abroad? Let me tell you how. We make regular comments on this topic, and in this case as well. There are several ways which we use trying to solve this issue. This includes the public statements as well as sending the relevant protest notes or protest letters to our partners in the countries who experience such informational lawlessness. We also publish our public reactions and try to relay our information and position, saying that such attitudes towards the media are not unacceptable. We raise this issue at the international organizations, various platforms and conferences which are held under the aegis of the international organizations and global organizations. Undoubtedly, these are comprehensive measures. This is a comprehensive approach to solving or helping to solve these issues by the media themselves. Rather often we react to the addresses of the media and the journalists themselves when they ask us for our assistance and support, and many of you in this hall can confirm my words, since we receive letters and addresses from the editors, from the journalists, asking for our support. These are not just the measures that we develop and which are adopted by the world community. We also work directly with the journalists or the media who ask for our assistance. In fact, we are working as a so-called informational emergency aid. We receive letters from the journalists, from the local agencies who send the materials, the texts or videos or the documents, confirming that their activities are being blocked. This is a comprehensive approach. Now next, please. Andrei Zhishko, Federal News Agency. Yesterday, following another round of the trilateral contact group talks in Minsk, the special representative of the OSCE, Martin Sadik, declared that the peace in Donbass from the 21st of July has brought significant results. Do you agree with this evaluation, and could you make a comment on the results of these talks? Thank you.
I can only express my optimism with such an assessment made by the expert, and we proceed from the fact that this truce will indeed be in place, since it's called an infinite one. It will be as such. Are there any questions? Yes, please. Reuters agency, Alexander Sheynikov, could you please explain the situation concerning student visas issued by Russia and the US? Yes, the situation concerns with... Is it Reuters agency? Yes. Could you please pull yourself together, and we will try to understand what you're talking about. It seems that Russian students didn't get American visas. Well, it's the first time that I hear about that. Probably these are not students that did not receive the visas, and probably you're not from the Reuters. No, I do not believe that. Maybe the audience can help the colleague from Reuters answer the question. Well, I hurried up here. Well, what about the situation concerning the visas provided by the US to Russian students? Well, the Americans do not try to solve the issue on a global basis. Maybe you could say, you could help the Reuters agency to answer the question. Well, our Armenian colleagues understood nothing. Well, since they didn't understand, it's far from me to understand that. Maybe you will receive something from the Reuters agency. So we'll wait. Just a minute. It's for the Reuters to answer the question. If you can help, please do. Please pose this question to your colleague from the Reuters. Well, I have time. Just wait a minute, please. Can you ask the question tomorrow? Well, you can even show me the picture, just as you are taught in Reuters. You were taught poorly in Reuters. You would like to show me your mobile phone so that I could read? You know, it's like a joke. When a student comes to pass an exam, he is a first-year student, he has prepared very well for the exam. Well, it's not a serious approach. You have already started laughing. Just wait. So a freshman comes to pass an exam. He did everything. Then he is a sophomore, and he has already made special prompts and passed an exam. Then he is a third-year student, and he made even more sophisticated prompts and passed an exam. So now he is a fourth-year student. He did not prepare for the exam, but he brought his book with him, and he finally passed the exam. Now he is a fifth-year student. He has nothing with him, no prompts, no sophisticated prompts, and then he takes out a book and shows it to the professor and asks the professor to read the answer on his own. Now I need a pin to unblock it. So this is about visas, and we have commented about that practically 10 days ago. There was a leak made by the American side. It appeared on the media. Russia supposedly did not provide visas to the American teachers, and we said that it was not the case, and we explained in detail what happened on the basis of reciprocity. We have reached a certain agreement, and when it comes to the technical and administrative personnel and teachers, we have achieved some changes, and we have managed to overcome the crisis. And I would like to remind you that if a Russian citizen wants to have an American visa, he or she has to wait for many days until he or she can go to an interview, and our athletes cannot participate in sports events that take place in America. And there is a question of organizing sports events in America, since visas can be issued within the necessary time period. As you can see, we live in a different reality, which does not suggest issuing visa within 300 days or even more. Sometimes we do not receive an answer, neither positive or negative, and people know nothing about the deadlines. And we are speaking about people that do not pose a threat, but that try to develop the bilateral relations and who are very prominent in the sphere of sports and cultural life. So this is how I'm going to answer your question, and I will give you mobile phone back after the briefing. Are there any other questions? Steve, Germany, Oleg Prokhorov. Tomorrow, the ANEF Treaty will go down to the annals of history. The situation changed about that. There were talks that it bounds Russia much more than America, or shatters the relations, and can have serious consequences for the security in general. And it terminates tomorrow. Is it good or bad for Russia? And what's Russia going to do, since it's not bound by the treaty? We have addressed this issue in detail. From the very beginning, we said that it was the initiative of the United States, first to shatter and then to pull out of the agreement. It was a serious mistake made by Washington in different terms, and we have given the United States numerous chances to go back to the legal context. If there are concerns related to this treaty. We are ready to answer them. We have conducted several events, explanatory ones and practical ones, meetings with the participation of our military experts and specialists who are ready to provide explanations on any issues, including with the demonstration of the relevant facilities that raised concern among our foreign partners. What did we see? We saw unwillingness to participate in such meetings, verging on aggressive willingness to prevent the partners to participate in any explanatory events designed to find some common grounds for discussing this topic. Indeed, we witnessed aggressive information campaign in the US that topsy-turvied everything, accusing Russia of withdrawing from the agreement in the first place, and we saw how NATO bodies were involved as participants of this information campaign. We regret that deeply. Well, I mean the shattering and the undermining and eliminating of the treaty, as well as the information atmosphere, information climate that was created, and so on. This is an anti-example and the counter-example of how we should solve difficult issues in today's world. And instead of creating a tool of lifting all the concerns, we can see that it is more and increasingly used, and we can see the steps taken in the directions of undermining the existing arrangements. And tomorrow, I am sure, the relevant statement will be made, because, as you have mentioned, it's a momentous event, and though negatively, it will go down to history, unfortunately. Are there any questions? If there are no questions, I say you goodbye and see you in Solnechnogorsk. And I'm ready to the colleague from Reuters, his working tool. Thank you.